conversation. My plan is to kind of go through just some of the initiatives we do, some of the training we do, just to help you understand kind of, first of all, what the role of the Sheriff's Office is, and then what are the things we're trying to do. And as always, look for feedback, look for guidance, and look for some understanding. So I'm going to get started here and kind of lead you through a handful of slides. And then when we're all done, we can go through some question and answers too, and hopefully I can answer some questions. I know I don't have all the answers, that's for sure, but I'll try my best and kind of share some of my thoughts with you. So just a brief snapshot. Here's me and my family. I got 2 young daughters, 5 and 8. My wife, Debbie. We live down in Jordan. And just quick background on me. So I was born and raised just outside of Jordan on a small farm. And locally went to school in Jordan, went down to Mankato State for a bachelor's degree and later a master's degree. I've been with the Sheriff's Office for 24 years. I started in the jail when I was in college as a 20-year-old. So I've been working here for my whole career, and that's the reason I'm here. I love my community. I give it my all and care so much about the outcomes in our community for each and everybody that lives here. So that's what I get from policing, and that's what I look for in our employees to want to serve where they live and make a difference for people. There's some old silly pictures of me. So to start off, what is a sheriff? So I know there can be a confusion of the sheriff gets elected, there's police chiefs, there's state patrol, there's all these entities, but the county sheriff follows from kind of old England, some of the things we brought over from the colonies of how we do business. The sheriffs of those times did a lot of other things too, like collected taxes and did things of serving the courts, serving the king, things like that. In Minnesota, it's a statutory definition. So I'm not part of the Constitution of Minnesota. It's a statute that tells me what I do, what my role is. So I kind of just highlighted some of the main things that make it more layman terms, but you'll see sheriffs and deputies, out in the streets working in a lot of the rural areas because there isn't police departments in areas that don't have city limits. And then we also do a lot of work in the courts, serving orders. That's where we get involved in order for protections, foreclosures, evictions, warrants, things that a judge signs or orders. And then lake and snowmobile patrol. So you'll see like a boat of ours out on a city like Parr Lake out in the lake, even though it's within the city limits. That's just part of the statutory role that we play, is it's our job to patrol those areas. And then a lot of other things, there's dozens of other statutes too, but that's kind of the crux of what we do. And then the next topic, sometimes people think too, oh wait, you're a county sheriff, you're elected, you can do what you want. Why don't you just add 10 new people and get that done? But it's a relationship between myself and a county board. I can't raise taxes, I can't levy taxes. So the county board approves when I can add people or not, or when I can start a new program or not. They can set my budget. I can do with it within that budget or set policy of how I accomplish a mission, but it's a relationship with the county board who actually funds the positions in the sheriff's office. And then lastly, a county jail is the other role that in the state of Minnesota, the county sheriff is responsible for operating a county jail. And we don't control who's in the jail. That is set on whether they're arrested in the street or go to court and get, brought in. And then judges control what the bail is, the length of a sentence, when the next court date is. So the jails are very challenging because it's, as most of my job, it's not all within my control of what happens. You're at the whim of the other branches of government. And then in Scott County, what the sheriff's office looks like is we patrol the townships. So you'll see there's 10 townships, and that's the area between city limits. It's unincorporated and rural. So we patrol that area, and then the city of Credit River, or the township of Credit River, they're changing over next month to become a city. They are contracting with the sheriff to provide police services. So there's 8 police departments in the city. And then, like I said, the sheriff's office operates those rural areas. And then we also operate the dispatch center. So any 911 call for police, fire, ambulance that comes in goes to our center in Shakopee here in my building. And then they send it out to the appropriate police, fire, EMS. Here's just our core values. We revamped these just this last winter here, trying to take account that they hadn't been looked at in a handful of years. So tried to update them, but as I mentioned previously, the goal of law enforcement is really may sound corny, the protect and serve, but really, how do you accomplish that? And that's where we have core values. These are things we speak to now of our employees. These are mentioned in our, quarterly newsletter internally. Like, it's constantly reminded of when you're making decisions, are they based on these pieces? And in general, doing the right thing and providing customer service. Just a snapshot of our organizational chart, just to kind of understand too the different roles we play. So like I mentioned, the jail, there's then the operations, which is the patrol out in the streets. And then the investigations, some of the court pieces we do, the support staff. And then under dispatch, we also are in charge of emergency management in our county for the county's role. So you'll see us also doing preparations for flooding and train derailments, things like that in the community that make sure our partners and us are all prepared to deal with. Organization as a whole is about 160 employees, give or take. And then we have a bunch of volunteer groups too. We have reserve deputies and we have weather spotters. So about 200 total people kind of fall within that reach. But a lot of complex jobs we do. Our county runs very lean on staffing wise. So I don't get droves of new people every year to add to new positions. We do a lot of work with what we got and do a lot of adjusting of tasks to when we find efficiencies to accomplish it. So one question that came up in a previous meeting was kind of like, what are some of the county board strategies? So the board, like I mentioned, they don't give me direction, but they provide me funding and we all play on the same team. So the county board sets strategies every 3 years of kind of where they want to put their initiatives, where they want to put future funding, where they want to make sure they accomplish things. So as part of that process, well, now it's 2019 when we were getting these ready, but were things that I find that can be goals to the sheriff's office. So I've taken some of these initiatives and said, all right, I also want to make sure some of this happens. So some of it, as I mentioned here, is recidivism rates. So, I don't obviously control that. It's a probation thing. There's a court thing. There's multiple players, but it speaks to the collaboration we do at the county. So I've been sitting on a justice steering committee where myself, the county attorney, judges, the other court staff, probation, and county administration to talk about all these pieces around like recidivism, how to keep people out of our systems, how to get the best outcomes. So from that is where we see now we have a drug treatment court, we have a veterans court. So there's been some funding received for some projects like that. So I use these strategies as a way to kind of help guide my request for funding as well. In there too, I'm mentioning about health insurance, things the county is looking at is how do you help get people more reintegrated into society when they leave our jail, for instance. So through a drug treatment court, we have a half-time position in the jail working with that. It's not nearly enough. I'd like to get more staff in there, but helping people get reintegrated so when they leave our facility, they're not going to be coming back because there's not any supports there for them. Another strategy was talking about just of some of the participation with the community being involved. So a lot of the community engagement stuff we're doing. One piece out of this I'm looking to create hopefully the next year here is like a citizens advisory committee to the sheriff. So similar to the other committees or boards that advise the county board on pieces, I want to pull together a diverse community of representatives from our community just to speak to me and give me ideas, give me feedback, and make sure we're kind of going forward in the right direction. And then another strategy of the board is, trying to improve our workforce, get us more diverse, get better people on the bus that can drive us into the future. So we'll talk about some of these other ones later here, but just a lot of the pieces of getting a more diverse workforce that's more reflective of who lives in our community or who visits our community. So I don't know if many of you heard, but back in, I believe this was published in 2014, or it started in 2014, I think published in 2015. President Obama at the time got together a group of people from across the nation to kind of build some recommendations. So when I became sheriff in 2016, myself and the other chiefs in Scott County kind of spent some time at our monthly meetings working through, there's 6 pillars that kind of highlight recommendations of how to accomplish, law enforcement moving forward. So we reviewed that, we came up with some ideas, and then I kind of used that as my building block going forward. And so that's how I'm going to kind of frame the rest of the conversations. I'm going to kind of put things into buckets under these pillars to kind of guide what we're doing, why we're doing it. But that's kind of the area that got us started, was using that as kind of a guiding point. So the first one, building trust and legitimacy. So as we see everything going on in the world, and especially here in Owen, Minnesota, the behaviors of law enforcement, the interactions with law enforcement, all can put us in two categories. It can either be building trust and understanding or patience, or it can be taken away from our legitimacy by undermining our community. So this one's super important. So some of the areas we worked on the last 4.5 years, community engagement. So that was something that prior to me being sheriff, we didn't have a real plan. We'd do some community events and we'd be out in the public, but we didn't really have an organization behind it. So when I became sheriff, I had Deputy Lick, who's in the top right there, assigned. She has a real interest in doing this. She's kind of our liaison to the community. So she helps build up programming, helps us get out in the community, and it's kind of my go-to when I come across something that we want to accomplish. So we started doing more events. You see on the bottom, there's a picture of our Citizens Academy. We do that yearly. We've done that for 18, 20 years now, but we also flip that and kind of tried to make it more engaging, build up the involvement, and even looked at changing what we're doing, versus presenting to more maybe showing, doing some more hands-on, giving people an example of what our goals are, what we're trying to accomplish, and hopefully get more feedback. There's a few more slides. So we do a fishing event every summer with youth, but also we've been doing that for years, but I started 4 years ago trying to do more outreach too with our communities, so we get a more diverse turnout and more opportunities for kids to get to meet us and somebody in uniform and build a memory that might build more understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. And this page has a couple other events we've been doing too. So through Special Olympics, there's Tip a Cop, where the officers go out to restaurants and serve people. There's different boat safety we do. We've done Coffee with a Cop at numerous communities. And a lot of these two will partner up with one of our cities. So we'll do it in Shakopee or Jordan and go to a McDonald's or an event like that and do it alongside them as well. And then the middle picture there is called, it's through Minnesota Adopt. So they do a program every August with kids in the adoption program foster system. And they have a local sheriff where the kid lives, take them back to school shopping, give the kid an opportunity to go shopping, get some brand new clothes and gear for school, and build that up. So, and then these last ones, some just general events like the county fairgrounds, going to other youth events. Our dispatchers on the bottom there, they go out to community events too and speak to kids in like summer camps, trying to explain what we do. When they call 911, what's going to happen. And then lastly, a lot of book reading in schools and handing out, Halloween trick-or-treating events, just a lot of things. The simple piece I look at this part of community engagement is a lot of people that I know that went into law enforcement because of a connection. They went in because of a family member, an uncle, a neighbor, something made a connection to them. Mine was, I remember it, even meeting the county sheriff when I was, I don't know, 5th, 6th grade, it had an impact on me. And I got introduced at some, community events. So we're trying to build those events. We want to have the kids in our community, if they have an interest in public safety, grow up and come back and serve here and make this a better place. So that's what we're trying to accomplish there. The second pillar, policy and oversight. This one, really I'll tell you my philosophy and then we'll get into some of the policy pieces, but really what I looked at is as community events happen or things are going on in the nation, you can see the direction we need to be heading in law enforcement. So I've really pushed our instructors and our folks that do training, how do we get ahead of that when we see it's coming and start doing it before it becomes mandatory. So you look at implicit bias. We brought in some people, sent some deputies to classes back in 2016 and tried to get that conversation moving. So our employees started being on the front end of some of that versus waiting for a rule to change and the state tells us we have to train on it. So we really try to be ahead of those conversations and pay attention to the environment around us and what are things that we can learn from that. In a nutshell, most policies in law enforcement are pretty consistent across the state of Minnesota. A lot of it is spelled out by the Minnesota Post Board of what are some either mandated elements or model policies you should use. So a lot of it is very spelled out, but of course, like we can see, how you train within that and how you speak to those policies is really what impacts our communities. And then looking at other pieces, crisis intervention, de-escalation, other things that get brought into training that literally 20 years ago did not happen. There wasn't that understanding of how your training can actually create worse outcomes by not using that. So, years ago now, we bring in de-escalation, bring in, when you're doing scenarios that are actually realistic to what you would see in the field, that allows you to actually handle that call or that scenario in a realistic way, and helps you reinforce that de-escalation. And partial policing is obviously part of our policies and something that is followed. And the main thing to understand with policies is that's not only how we operate, but that's how we adhere or confirm that that's being adhered to. So if a complaint would come in about a deputy behaving in a way to somebody out on a traffic stop, these policies then are what gives us the ability to act upon that, and take care of that problem. And employee conduct is a big one. And then leading into the third pillar, technology and social media. So here's where we'll kind of highlight some of the pieces we've implemented these last few years and help keep us moving forward. And the first one would be the squad cameras. So we've had them for years. When I became sheriff in 2016, I put in for a acquisition, or it's called capital improvement plan. I put in for request to fund body cameras. Our county didn't have them. We didn't have them set for funding. So that was approved. The way the budget works on those big projects is it's a 5-year lookout. So they were supposed to happen last year, and then the COVID uncertainty economy, that project got put on hold. It's back up and moving right now. So I'm hoping by the end of the year we'll have those. They're much needed resource. What we found through the squad cameras that we've had for over a decade is the value in it's not only documenting what happens and providing better evidence, but it's a great training tool. Reviewing, so all the supervisors will review each month various calls that every deputy goes on, just to see how they interact with the public, how they behave, tactically. Are they standing there with their hands in their pockets, not being safe? Are they, actively doing things? How are they treating people? And just been a great training tool. So we really look forward to getting body cameras, which will give us even better understanding of what's happening out there. We put a lot of responsibility onto people, but we also can't be with them every minute to, observe how they do things or what they're relaying to the public. And it's a really good tool. And on a total side note, you also find out the really good officers, how they really, you would never see in a ticket or in a report some of the way they actually really treat people. The officer giving the family, the kid a teddy bear on a traffic stop to help ease the kid's mind, or the simple things like that wouldn't show up in a report, but you watch the video and you see the mom shaking the hands of the officer after that interaction because, we were kind to them and we did our job, but also did it with kindness and respect. So that's been a good way too, to also build up the deputies out there that are really doing a great job. We can see that and praise that. So it's a good tool, and we look forward to implementing those later this year. Hopefully it keeps moving on track. So some other technology we've taken on is not necessarily law enforcement technology, but it's applications technology that helps us interact with the public better and safer. So one of my big pushes has been interactions on mental illness and working with people that are in crisis and finding solutions that aren't resulting in a use of force or a law enforcement interaction that's not where we're trying to get. So Vitals is an app that our county deputies all carry, and if somebody is on this subscription, it's a nationwide product, they choose to get on this subscription and upload information about themselves. So a good example would be maybe you have a child on the autism spectrum who wanders, and you're worried that he may wander off and nobody will know how to interact with them or how to help him. You upload some basic information on this app about your child, how to interact with them. You upload your phone number. Some parents even upload a video of the parent speaking to the child. So if we get within, I think it's 50 feet of them, our phone will actually pop up in this app and drop this information in front of us and say, oh, this, we may be dealing with a suspicion at the park because somebody's like, oh, there's some 6-year-old kid walking around here. And we now, boom, would know enough about them to interact with them, or to go, oh, I don't even need to approach them. I can dial mom from right here and say, oh, are you looking for your son, John? Oh, yeah, I thought he's in the house, and we can tell you where he's at, and there's no even interaction. So it's one of those tools we implemented a couple years ago to try to reduce the amount of conflict that we come upon and provide a better service. Like I said, it gives us the ability to know. People can also use it for medical conditions and make us aware of, if they're say a diabetic, we would be aware then and may know why they're behaving a certain way or driving really poorly. They may be in having a blood sugar issue. So trying to engage in items like that really can turn the corner for people on our interactions. Project Lifesaver, another similar thing. This is more for people that wander. So it could also be for adult with dementia. They can carry a beacon on them, and the family then can call us, and we can come out with some real basic technology, but it helps us triangulate where they are, how to find them, get them home quicker. So that's a service we provide throughout the county to any resident. Community Crime Map is part of our records management system. We run it for the whole county for all the police departments as well. So every incident that goes in the same database. So a police officer in Jordan will also be aware of an interaction that person had in Savage, the day before or not. Well, one tool in there is a community crime map. So it allows the public to go on and just be aware of what's going on in their community. It obviously restricts certain private data or victim data or addresses that are concerns, for a victim, but allows people to be more aware of what's going on, what's the law enforcement activity, why is there, there are a lot of accidents at a near intersection, things like that. And then kind of rounding out social media, of course, Facebook, Twitter, all those things. We try to do a lot of posts on not only what's going on in the community, like just tonight we had to make a post that there's not a curfew in Scott County because there was a lot of misinformation because of some of the alerts that had gone out across the metro. They weren't very specific. So we use social media as a way to try to keep people in the loop of what's going on and where you can, find us and engage with us and see us. And then press releases. We use a tool on our website too. We try to do press releases on different activities going on that our local newspapers or radio stations can publish, just to keep people aware too of what is going on. Try to be as transparent as possible. Pillar 4, community policing and crime reduction. So this is some of the pieces I've already talked to, but I'm going to kind of shoot through some of the other partnerships we have here in the county to, like I said, try to influence better relationships and better outcomes for our people. So Canvas Mental Health is our mobile crisis team for mental health issues. And they came to Scott County in 2018. Prior to that, we had a contract with a different provider. And I had worked really hard I serve on a mental health advisory board with community members, working hard with county admin to really push to get a more specialized, specific service to our community. The previous service, we didn't see a lot of interaction in people's houses. We saw a lot of meeting people at, say, the hospital after they had already been transported there, and then not a lot of follow-up care. What we're seeing now with Canvas is a lot more follow-up, which deputies and police officers now can actually just make referrals. They may be helping somebody with an issue, but they make that referral if Canvas isn't able to come there first. And we see a lot of reduction in the amount of times we go to a house as law enforcement. And instead, we know that Canvas is now doing the work, going up and following up with that family for weeks afterwards to make sure they have, things squared away with whether it's maybe a medication or getting an appointment or just general follow-up to the family to help them understand the system. Because what we find in general is there's a lot of needs out there, and there's 911, which is a known commodity of what to call, and law enforcement gets those calls. And we'd rather work on the front end to get people to the right resources. That person in uniform can provide some level of care, but they don't really have the resources to help in these situations. So really been working hard to get these things implemented and hopefully to grow those resources. Southern Valley Alliance, their local partner for domestic violence in the county. So we partner with them as well. We have a deputy assigned as a liaison to kind of work with them, make sure we're sharing information on calls we're at, and then partnering on resources. And then the IRTS facility in Savage, there's a lot of talk about this the last few years too. It opened last fall. So intensive residential treatment services, the mental health residential center that provides a couple levels of care for people in our community, and also helps them transition back into the community. So somebody that may be in a hospital today needs that bridge to get back in the community to kind of get settled in, get their independence back, get their feet underneath them. So I was a big proponent of that, getting the county to partnership with, we worked with Dakota County and some other partners in the community here, and then got some bonding money from the state of Minnesota to get this building built in Savage. And it's operated by Guild Incorporated, but the county kind of took the lead on getting it built and getting it implemented. And then further on the partnerships, just some more of our community engagement revolves around mainly a couple of churches in Shakopee here who've really embraced our desire to engage. And so we've done a lot of activities there, and we're always open to more activities as well. So with these two churches, a lot of activities. The end of year soccer camp, our deputies come and engage the kids, play soccer, do face painting, just try to build memories, build experiences with kids. And our staff, of course, benefits from this as well, getting to know who the kids are in the community, and having those positive interactions is really all part of, I think, pretty successful law enforcement. Some more activities they do there. They do some different food drives, different clothing drives that we participate in and help out. And then here's us playing soccer, even an action shot of me. And then lastly, the Light of the World Church in Shakopee 2, Deputy Lick started a resource fair that they did every spring, except for last year, but we did it for 3 years in a row here. And she took community engagement kind of philosophy and realized in engaging some of these churches that the general fear in that community was not just about law enforcement, but was, understanding even what the government resources and programs are. So she organized this group. You can see on the list there all the logos, but getting public health, the libraries, getting the fire department, all the different groups, legal aid, resources in the community to come and kind of speak about what they do and really engage that community and build some trust. And it became an annual event here every spring. And then lastly, some of the partnerships or roles I've taken on as my role as a county sheriff. All the sheriffs work together on a Minnesota Sheriff's Association. So we work together and implement strategies across the state and are asked to serve on different boards, individual sheriffs are. So I just of last week was appointed by Governor Walz to serve on the Peace Officers Standards and Training Board to represent one of the county sheriff positions on that board. So I'll be starting that work here, not next week, but the week after my first meeting, but really looking at how we fine tune how policing is done in Minnesota, how the standards are set. So I look forward to getting in and roll my sleeves up and helping on that big project. And then there's some other examples of boards I've sat on in the last couple of years here, where I've worked, like I said, worked with people across the state to help bring change and bring better outcomes. And then, I believe community advocacy is important. So housing is a big issue here in Scott County, as well as all across our state and especially metro area. So I also take pride in standing up and speaking. So I've been part of some activities with Beacon Interfaith. They're looking at building the Prairie Point building here in Shakopee. And so I've gone to different events. I speak about these things and try to bring some support, where I can to bigger needs of the community, knowing that some of these issues lead to some of our criminal justice issues down the road, and giving people a better chance in housing and workforce is the way to get us away from having public safety being that hammer that seems to always be involved. Another example, just last weekend, I was asked to speak at a Stop Asian Hate Forum on a Zoom event. So I was able to speak there, and well-organized event, big turnout, over 200 people that showed up, and I was able to answer some Scott County specific questions from some of our community members. And then the Lights On program is another smaller program we do, and it's become very popular across the state here. I think there's over 100 law enforcement agencies participate at this point, but basically we have all these interactions with people on traffic stops. We have equipment violations. This program is a grant-funded tool that we're able to give you a voucher, not a ticket, and you go to a local car repair type place, and they turn the voucher, and you get your headlight, tail light, what have you replaced. And you're back on the street, safety's improved, and there's a positive experience on the back end. So happy to see my deputies involved in that. And I think that's been it's a Minnesota project that's now going kind of nationwide. It's reached out in some other communities. And then these are some stickers we designed too recently last year, and they've kind of spread in some of our other communities. So we just got a request today from Ohio, from fire department that wanted them, but trying to find other ways to engage people that whether the stickers on your car or on your house, is that a better positive interaction that the responder, the first responder shows up and knows maybe why you're not responding or what your need is, and we can have a better interaction with you. So, and then kind of wrapping up, a couple other things we've done is remodeled our interview rooms recently. Instead of a table and 4 folding chairs, like you'd see on TV, revamping some of our soft interview rooms for speaking with children and victims to make it a little bit more of a peaceful experience for them as they share their trauma. Trying to find more victim-centered approaches in how we do investigations. Community feedback, something that we started last year, and this is how I met Misty. I did a survey last summer, and we got 70-some responses. Not a ton, but we're trying, so we're reaching out there. But it did cause some good conversations. Like Misty had reached out to me and said, actually, I want my kids to kind of learn more about what's going on after everything they've seen. And as your sheriff, I'll come out and talk to you. I'll come out and sit in your living room with you and talk about it and explain it. And so we started that, and that's an ongoing format. And then through that as well on our website, we made an information packet too. So people going to fill out the survey can also read quick, I think it's maybe 8 pages, but it kind of summarizes some of our policies, procedures, training, some of the common questions that do come up of what is law enforcement accomplishing here or not. And then also community feedback is important to the county. So they do a county-wide survey every 3 years. And obviously the county has a lot of services, a lot of pieces that they're trying to account for, but there are some questions around public safety that are asked, tied into some of the other programming we do, but it gives us some feedback of what our perception is in the community. And we take that and go with it. And then lastly, training. I see that I'm plowing through the time here. I want to leave some time for questions and answer here. So training is pretty important to us. Like I offered up before, we really are always looking for what are the needs of the community? What are things we can do to, so instead of just looking at the mandated things, what's new? What's the community talking about? CIT has obviously been talked about a lot in the community lately. We took that from having a few CIT deputies 4 years ago to, I've trained over 70 of our employees on this. It's a week-long 40-hour class, but it's scenario-based. So they not only learn about mental health crisis and diagnosis, but they also do scenarios for probably 2/3 of the class with real-life actors that are acting out maybe a mental health crisis. So the deputies' interactions either inflates it or de-escalates it or makes it better or worse. So it's been a good training. The deputies bring that back now to every encounter they go to. They have another layer of knowledge that helps them interact with the public and also understand how their tone or interaction with somebody can affect them, and being able to read that and know that, this is going the wrong direction. We need to bring this back. So we also train dispatchers and corrections officers on this, knowing that mental health is a big issue of jail population, and their dispatch center, of course, is going to see dozens of calls around mental health a day when they're dispatching calls for our local police. I think responding to medicals is a big deal. Anybody that's watched the trial for the last 2 weeks here sees that, I think, firsthand. But so instead of just doing the basic medical training that's required in the state, all of our deputies are first responders, which is like a week-long course. Then there's refresher every year they have to do basic first aid and emergency medical type things. But We also started, we have a handful of deputies that are EMTs. So you'd see an EMT on a, maybe on a ambulance crew. There's paramedics and EMTs. The EMT is the lower level of the two, but very highly trained. So we started sending this last fall, now we're sending one a year to EMT to, if somebody wants to better their knowledge on medical situations, we're going to support them. The deputy sent this last year is also a firefighter in the city of Jordan. So the city of Jordan is going to benefit as well by getting a little better service from that firefighter. But I think that Narcan, these are all important things that we have to be aware of what the medical are, what we're actually seeing, especially as we see it could play out in a use of force incident, and a misunderstanding or a lack of knowledge could really have bad consequences. And then a quick side note on, I used Minnesota State University where I'd gone to college. I used some instructors there to help me back in 2017 and 18 as well. The conversations were starting to go around the nation about, police reform and some of the lack of understanding law enforcement has of the history of policing. So I brought in these two professors. One was a law enforcement professor. The other worked in the education field, and were able to bring their experiences from law enforcement, from being a person of color, as well as their academics, and do a training for our deputies on the historical implications of law enforcement in our country, and mind-opening to most of our officers who weren't aware of some of the early uses of law enforcement, in addition to stuff that we're seeing in our recent history. So that was good. And then by bringing that in, we opened that up. Deputies from Carver County, Dakota County came, as well as city police officers. So I always try to look at, if we can do something, how can we also broaden that across our region? And this is just a picture of example of a Facebook post dated a couple years ago. We did a training on interactions with people with permit to carry, armed people on a traffic stop. So we brought car in, we used some of our role players and brought into the range and went through scenarios of what to do. And this is all based on the Felial Castile shooting. Like, how could that have gone way differently? And we walked deputies through it, practiced. What can you experience when you're dealing with somebody that's armed or saying they're armed or has a permit? How do you get yourself in a better position that you're not interacting in a way of how that turned out? So always looking for examples in our community of how we can build from very unfortunate things that happen, but how can we make sure that we're constantly trying to think of how we can do better and equip our officers to have better skills. And then True North Policing was a video that was made for statewide for all law enforcement, talking about not only constitutional policing, but ethics, and it also touched on the historical context. So our deputies, we volunteered to be part of it, use our courtroom to do the filming, and then of course provided that training to all of our staff. Then officer wellness, the big thing that's talked about. There's some trainings within the county, but basically all that comes back to is how do we also take care of our employees that we don't see the side effects or bad effects of a PTSD type situation or other things that then happen that impact our ability to engage our community. And then just lastly, I'm going to speak about diversity and what we're trying to do. So I've been really working on a diverse workforce, and it's there's challenges. We deal with unions, we deal with employee relations, hiring practices, things like that. But some simple things I've done is simply allowing us to have a preference for a bilingual applicant, for instance. So if you're bilingual and apply to us and you check that box, we're going to increase your chance that you get a first round interview, that you get in the door. So there's pieces like that we've been doing that are slowly trying to get us there. And I'm proud of where we're getting, but there's definitely a lot more work to do. And then, as I talked about earlier, my own example, living in this community, policing here, I think I provide a service because I care for the community, and so we really push our deputies. So as you see there, 80% do live within the county, to come here not only to work, but to live, to raise their family, coach soccer, go to church, get involved, be a Lions Club member. I think that is also a big impact. The care you're going to give to the community you serve versus driving to a job and just, doing that instead of working in your backyard. And then we go to a lot of community outreach fairs, career fairs, trying to do outreach. And we also work with the Shakopee High School quite a bit with their new academies programs that they're doing. So trying to build in, as they're getting this off the ground, more emphasis on kids that want to choose a path in public safety, how they can more exposure and more ability to kind of get a good handle of what that looks like. And then next, this is just some demographics. So I use our jail staff as an example of how we can do it. So if you look at our countywide demographics, you know, we're doing pretty good. We're doing okay. Now the county jail serves the whole community, so that's pretty reflective. That's good. But I look at our jail staff as my ultimate recruiting tool. A lot of folks that I can get working in the jail because it's not as many qualifications as a police officer, not as much schooling. If I can get them hired and get them working for us, and they have an interest to become a deputy someday, I think that's my best chance for recruiting a more diverse workforce versus just sending out the job posting and kind of ending up with who applies and who goes into law enforcement. So really trying to recruit jail dispatch, those entry-level positions to build up the rest of our workforce. And then this example just shows what our deputies look like in the community. So we patrol the townships and then Credit River, very rural areas. So we're meeting the standards there, not on women, obviously, but you know, we're close, but that's just that section of our population. Like I said, just the rural areas where we patrol is obviously very white. So we're doing okay in patrol, but my goal is to get our whole sheriff's office to be reflective like the jail is. So trying to build from that. I'll finish with my card here and information. All I ask is I want to know what people think. Reach out to me, email me, send me a Facebook message, whatever feels good. But not just today. I want to know what people think, what they're worried about, what we can do better. And I can be a voice for that. But I do find generally as an elected official, I don't hear very often from the public. So I really am eager when I get in people that want to have good conversations and really share what their concerns are. Benefits us all. It helps me do a better job to understand what is needed. I'll turn off the PowerPoint there. And I appreciate everybody's time. I look forward to some questions.
Okay, looks like we have a few. And also before everyone goes, I do have a resource to provide. So just that will be at the end. So I forgot to plug that at the beginning. First of all, someone would like to say thank you for your work on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force, which I don't believe you mentioned. So I don't know if you'd like to mention that just a little bit, and then I'll get to the next question.
Yeah, it was on one of my slides, and I realized I was running pretty long, but the MMIW, the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, was a statewide initiative began probably a year and a half ago and just wrapped up here this winter. I sat on that as a representative from the Sheriff's Association. We have a tribal nation in our community, so I volunteered to be part of that to help speak to their needs. But it was very interesting to learn what people's experiences are with law enforcement in some of these communities, the lack of trust, the lack of the indifference to how people were being treated on some of these investigations. So from that, we've got some recommendations to legislature that have been published, and now the work begins of trying to get some of those things accomplished to get better data sharing, better response to those issues. So great question. Thank you.
Next question is, does the Sheriff's Department set a standard for other police departments in regards to training?
No, we do not. So there's always some confusion. The county sheriff is looked at as the chief law enforcement officer for the community or for the county, which means I can kind of have the final say, like if something really went wrong, but generally I don't. I don't oversee a police department or the state patrol or anybody like that. The city of, Shakopee, for instance, has a police department, has a police chief. The mayor and the city council oversee them and their direction. The positive piece is we collaborate a lot, so is consistency in a lot of the training. Even on, you look at some of the, say if there's an active shooter, for instance, like in a school, we train all together of how we respond, knowing that every community would send officers to Shakopee if that happened here. So we train together. We do a lot. So there's a lot of best practices, but I don't have a final say either in what they do or don't do.
Next is just a comment, just to thank you for your work done in our community. Amy, the liaison, has been amazing. So that came from Mary Hernandez. So thanks, Mary. And she just is happy that you are really utilizing her in the community. They appreciate the focus on the understanding of mental health. Maybe if you just want to speak a little bit more to that, because I think there's a lot of more confusion about how to address mental health issues because they're not always a law enforcement issue. Sometimes they need more.
Yes. Yeah, what we found, I mean, this is going back to when the institutions were, defunded in mental health and people were pushed back in the community, but then the resources never stayed or caught up to what was needed. And then what we experience is law enforcement becomes a resource because people see somebody, whether it's somebody running down the street naked, talking that logically, we'll call 911 because that's who comes to fix stuff. And then you see the bad outcomes that happens when law enforcement shows up and this person's not responding to what I'm asking. This person's not, listening. They're not, and all of a sudden there's this altercation, so that happens no different than the family at home with a child who is struggling and now they don't know who to call. So it gets worse. Maybe the meds are being taken. And then 2 weeks later, we're getting the calls and now it's say a domestic or something getting broke in the house. And it ends up kind of putting it into this criminal element now because there's a domestic, there's an assault. And the better resources are getting people the best resource up front that it doesn't get to that point, getting people to have resources to call when something's not right, when they're concerned about something, shouldn't even need to involve law enforcement then, and try to reduce that. And then in turn, that turns into the mental health issues in a county jail or a prison system because of that. Now it becomes criminalized because we didn't fund the resources up front to actually give people help.
Okay. Very good. Thank you for that. Next one is thank you for your work. I'm glad to see changes in focus on mental health, domestic violence resources. Also, what plans do the Sheriff's Department / partnerships have, or what is being done to connect, develop relationships, and support communities of color following the murder of George Floyd and the most recent police-involved murder yesterday? That's a lot of question. No,
that's a great question though. I think, I've established a relationship with SDA years ago when I became sheriff. A lot of new faces, a lot of new program. It's been great. But this is where we need help in the fact that gathering people with us, helping us understand what are conversations that people need to hear. And that's why, we talked a couple months ago about planning this event, like framing it up and giving us any support you can, but it's also on us to reach out and to ask for that as well, I think. And anything we can do to build on that, but it's on us to build that. Relationships take time, they take trust, they take conversations. You don't accomplish it with one phone call and check it off a list. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But it pays off. It definitely pays off to the community as the outcomes, and it pays off to us as well, being more understanding and more knowledgeable what the community is looking for.
I know a couple of our panelists have questions, so let me get to the audience questions. I'll get back to Anna and Rich. Rich, you get to go first, but hold on. We have a couple of questions here. You mentioned, this is from participant, you mentioned a lot of preventative measures when it comes to unarmed people, particularly Black being killed. What about measures taken if it happens? Many officers are not even held accountable or given a slap on the wrist. What are your thoughts and policies on that? So example, kind of what we're seeing today.
Yeah, we're seeing today. So, as you're seeing today play out, even the difficult questions that were asked, not difficult questions, but there wasn't an answer. What's going to happen? Is this officer going to get fired? Why does this person still have a job? Things like that. And it's challenging. My assumption, that person will get fired. I think the people answering the questions today were like, we'll probably get to that tomorrow because we've been up all night. It's, of course, there's no easy answer. They've been up all night dealing with the other pieces of it, the investigation, whatever, but the outcome's going to be there. The state law changed quite a bit this last year on use of force, which has tightened the definition up a little bit of when officers can use force or not. Now with that, there's a lot of fear among officers of doubt. What am I doing? How am I supposed to accomplish things? But as I've told them, if you read the statute today and you read it from last year, we train you to do it right. Do it right. Take your time. Slow down. Take your time. You gotta take your time and slow down. And that's back to what de-escalation is about. And that's what we train to do, and that's what you want your officers to do. Back to, I think I got jumbled up on the question a little bit, but back to what should happen, you know, I said, so laws change. You obviously see officers getting charged now more frequently than, you know, we have in the history of law enforcement or policing in our state, at least. Is that the answer? Hey, it's a start. These are all unfortunate situations, but we can train better, we can do better, and we can respond better. Shouldn't, you know, some of these things we see happen aren't mysteries. They're things that training should deal with, understanding should deal with, you know, all of slowing down should deal with. But back to the discipline piece, there are, you know, we deal with union employees, we deal with, you know, rights that people have, due process and things like that. But we go through this process and we take care of stuff. I think it's also an excuse sometimes people use, oh, we can't fire people, they're union and it's really complicated. Well, if you're managing people, back to I talk about, if you're watching the squad video camera, for instance, if you're reviewing people's work, you're going to see those red flags before there's this big issue of somebody needing to get fired. You know, you're going to bring those issues up, you're going to address them as a supervisor. You need to be on your toes watching this stuff. And somebody that doesn't like that feedback will either get a different job or will change their ways. You know, they'll move on, but I treat a lot of it as some basic supervision pieces that need to be done better. You know, if you are paying attention to these red flags that come up, people's behaviors or their treatment of somebody on the side of the road, those are all signs that they're not the right person. But a lot of it comes back to hiring. We do psychological evaluations on people. We're not necessarily looking for a diagnosis on the DSM. You know, we're looking for, oh, you don't respect authority, you don't respond to criticism, you don't, you know, those are the red flags to us. Like, you're not going to be a good police officer if you can't, you know, if you're not a sound person in those ways. So a lot of it I see too goes back to the more precise you can be in hiring and sorting out who gets through that process and then monitoring behaviors. There's a lot of great people out there, but there's obviously some folks that create a lot of problems for everybody.
Okay. Another just a thank you for the work that you do with the Light of the World Church, and they miss Deputy Amy. Okay, one more, and then Rich, we will get to you. What type of training related to historical policing do your deputies receive that can help break some of those biases? Because you talked about the history of policing, which not very many people actually know. So how are you using that to break those biases?
So we use that to kind of open the door, bringing that presenter over a couple of years. So we got everybody exposed to it. And then now a lot of our training too is, there's some statewide training, which is positive as well, that kind of creates consistency. So, you know, everything's online, of course, nowadays. So there's a lot of 1 hour buckets of classes that we do throughout the year, whether it's an OSHA thing or it's implicit bias or mental illness. So now, you know, at least for us that subscribe to the statewide programming, we're getting these different classes just reiterated too through these things. So it kind of reinforces what we've talked about. But yeah, to the majority of the deputies and myself to understand some of the historical context of policing in regards to, you know, the Irish and plantations and all these pieces that, you know, growing up in Scott County, you didn't really understand where that comes from. So trying to bring that up, educate people and help them understand why there is, you know, lack of trust, why there is this historical trauma behind some of the understandings.
Okay, Rich, it's all you.
Thank you, Sheriff Hennen, for your time. I will be honest with you, I have law enforcement background and law enforcement knowledge, so some of these questions might be a little bit more as related directly to law enforcement. Part of your presentation, you talked about performance measures. How are you going to show the community what your performance measures are and how if you're not meeting those performance measures? Because I did look on your website and I don't see any performance measures.
So the county uses performance measures in our budgeting. So do you mean like
your department's performance?
Specific? Yeah,
specific to you.
Yeah, so the ones we track would be like, for instance, 911. It would be, you know, the return or the answering of 911 phone calls, the timeliness of that. You know, it'd be more of those generic or national standards that kind of show is dispatch working and things like that. But what are some of the performance questions? How about, because I don't think we have them. Yeah.
For instance, you talked a little bit shortly about the diversity. So what is your performance measure for, you said like the communities where you want to be, but what is like the community, and identifying that, and then being transparent and say, hey, this is where we are. This is where I want to see myself in 5 years. Basically, something like that. How are you going to show us that?
Yeah, so I pulled that data just the last couple of weeks, trying to understand what that looks like, what our demographics look like. But I don't have that specifically listed anywhere as a goal. But I totally see your point of how that would be valuable to have some return on it. Like in 3 years, we want to see here, or what that number is. Because I said we meet in our rural communities, of course, but my goal would be that our sheriff's office as a whole would be meeting what the reflection of the Scott County population is.
Yeah, but it's just that the public, and I'm thinking only as a public person, not knowing what those are and not being able to say, hey, this is where I'm going, and this is what my leadership is, and this is the steps that I'm going to take. Along with that is that I am unsure, and as a lot of community people, and I will tell you this from people of color, will tell you that I am unsure what the county sheriff's policies are in regards to engagement. And I am unsure what your policy are for going to be for body cams, and I am unsure what your policy are for use of force. One of the persons told me, and I did look at your website, like they told me that you have your policies listed on your website for the sheriff's office. And I went to that. It does say there is a tab for policies, and only thing that's there is a UAV policy. I was like, where's the rest of them?
We just added that last week. So as part of the drone and product body cameras, is you have to publish your policy publicly.
Yep.
So as we're doing this drone public hearing a couple weeks ago, we built in a thing for policies, and now our goal is to add more to that tab or what have you. And then body cameras as we come later this year, we'll be adding that as well. But yeah, it's a best practice now to add, whether it's your whole policy or the important policies like use of force, to have them publicly available. So yeah, now that we have that tab, their goal is to build those in.
Do you have a timeline for when you plan on publishing? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Are you going to have it done within a year, 6 months?
Oh, yeah, it should be done within a month here or whatever. We just had built it this last month to add that.
All right. Once again, another hard question for you is your Rural 20. People, are you using a third-party vendor to handle Rural 20? And for those who don't know what Rural 20 is, those are people who are considered non-competent to stand trial, but they've been arrested for whatever reason. So are you using a third-party vendor, or what do you do with those individuals? I know you probably don't have too many, but I'm assuming you might have a few.
Yeah, those come through with our inmate population. Those are ordered to court. I don't know who the court uses, to be honest, who the court orders it to, or what vendor we use, or who does it, but I could definitely find out.
No, I just wondering, do they stay under your custody? Do you ship them to Anoka? What do you guys do with them?
What I would understand is most of them get sent to one of the state hospitals, I believe.
Okay. All right. And then my last question for you is, does the Sheriff's Department use any type of risk assessment tools?
Do you mean like on a domestic violence, like a risk assessment?
Yes, on a domestic violence or anything like that. Do you guys do?
We use a tool that complements what probation uses when people come to their bail assessment. So we use, like, it's 4 or 5 questions that complement those questions to help get those questions out the door of, domestic violence is the main one we use.
All right, do you have that published anywhere? Because I had someone ask me that question as well, and I didn't see that.
No, I do not. We use the model that it's a model out of, I think, Canada, that our probation uses that's certified. We use that model, and we ask those questions.
And then the last thing is that I know you're always shorthanded, but I always wonder, does the county board help you, for instance, applying for grants? I mean, because there were like so many grants that I think that I know that you guys missed the boat on not applying for, because you guys don't have a person who can do that. Mm-hmm. So do they assist you on that?
Another important conversation. No, they do not. They don't have a staff person either that primarily does grants. So generically it falls upon us, but we're doing one right now. There's a POLAD Foundation grant that's out there.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so that we're applying for that. We're basically bringing in a third-party contract person to help us write it, who does public safety grants. So we're going to bring this lady on and see if we can get some co-responder model issues like that through that POLAD grant. It's something we're trying to do, but it's been on the top of my mind recently because there's opportunities out there to grow, and also the county board, for instance, I look at drug treatment court. To get them to just implement a new program is very difficult, but if it starts with a grant that says, you know, after 2 years or what have you, it must be funded, that seems to work very well because then they see the value in it and it gets funded. So I'm hoping this, like this POLAD grant or similar pieces around co-responder, will be successful to get us moving on some of those projects that are, I fear, will be hard to get funded if not.
Rich, hold on just a second.
Yes.
I just want to thank people. It is 8 o'clock. So for those of you who need to go, I just want to thank you for coming. Also, Sheriff Hennen, I don't know, there is a peer support program. It's called Wellness in the Woods. And I just want to make sure I highlight that, especially with a lot of the events going on and the recent police shooting. Sarah Danielson connected with me before this event to just let people know that that is a peer support group that people can check out. If you would like more information, it'll be sent out with a thank you. So for those of you who need to leave, thank you. For those of you who would like to say, Sheriff Hennen, you're on for more questions. So hold on, Rich. I do have one from somebody else. Actually, and Anna wants to go too.
It wasn't a question. It was just a statement for him.
Okay. Okay, hold on. So for everyone, thank you very much. The question I got was, what type of diversity, equity, and racial disparity training do officers receive, like more specifically?
On those topics?
Yes.
Yeah, so like some of it is just generically or inherent in some of just the diversity type classes, you know, that you do the county or not. But then now we've gotten more specialized in a lot of this online resources we use. So then that fills in the gap because the officers have to do so many hours of that a year in different categories. So each year we give them different categories, and then it repeats as well. So, you know, it's not like you just do 1 hour on this topic and never hear about it again. 2 years from now, you're going to probably be doing those similar classes that are now updated, but definitely a big topic that needs to keep being covered and reinforced.
Okay. Anna, you go ahead. I know that you had questions. Kevin, you have. Sorry, I'll let you two kind of go back and forth with that. Thanks for waiting.
Yeah, well, did Rich want to make a statement first? Rich, do you want to make your statement real quick?
The only question I had for you is that, is it possible that I can just send you an email? Because I know you're on this post-training board thing, but I can send you an email and hopefully you and I can have some dialogue about this, about that you just been appointed to that board.
Definitely.
Okay. I appreciate that, because when I tell you something, you're not going to believe it when I tell you.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
All right, well, very nice to meet you, Sheriff Hennen. My name's Anna Vergara. I'm the current president of Shakopee Diversity Alliance, and I have a couple questions for you. The first one was, you know, I was kind of in shock that Derek Chauvin was the trainer for the rest of the officers in that situation. And I'm curious, you know, who's in charge of training officers like here in Scott County? Do you have designated individuals taking charge of that? And then was there a discussion after that happened on ethics and when, you know, I mean, I think it should have been obvious, you know, to step in, but I know that there's that piece of authority there, but was there a discussion on when to step in and how to step in when you see that in a different officer is committing a crime?
Yeah, I'll start with the end first, just because it's a little more complex, but yeah, It's called duty to intercede. So that's been moved into policies now, and also into our state law and our way we're supposed to do our business, but duty to intercede. So now it's actually trained. When we do our yearly training, we speak about it every time. Like, what do you do? What's your role? Not what's your rank, not who's your trainer, who's in charge of the scene, who got there first. It's our role to stop. And more complicated is for a sheriff's deputy is we also spend a good chunk of our night assisting our local cities. You know, so we're out patrolling, but also go to Jordan, Belle Plaine, New Prague, Shakopee, whatever, and assist. And you don't even know who some of those officers are very well. You just come because they ask for help, you know, And that even gets more complicated of, oh, it's still your role to stop it or to do something or to intercede and act. And I compare back when I was new 24 years ago, you know, it was more of, oh crap, I don't want to go to call with that person anymore. I don't want to be around, you know, because nobody's telling you what you should do with that information. Where now new officers are getting told, no, it's your job. You own that, you know, and the positive thing too of officers seeing what happens criminally now too is they don't want to be part of that because they realize it's not going to be just that some bad happened and I was standing there looking the other way. Like, you're all going to get charged. You're all going to, you know, get fired or what have you for it. So it's really changed and some officers actually, I think, feel more empowered now because they have knowledge. Before we just didn't have knowledge. Nobody told us what to do when you saw something. And that's back to where you talk about the blue wall or those different things. Like there was just a lack of understanding of what your job is. And that's where I think even with mission, vision, all those things, if you tell your employees what their responsibility is, you tell them what's expected, you can hope to see a lot better outcome than somebody out there making a decision, not having any direction. You know, there's a good chance to make the wrong decision. So that has changed quite a bit in the last couple of years here of even with some of the other calls that came out in Minneapolis, especially here in our area, have really driven that understanding of what's your job? Your job's to stop it or to intercede and to make it right. And, you know, do the right thing for your community. As for the training officers, so what you're referencing is Chauvin is a field training officer. So new officers in law enforcement, you come with a degree, you come with, you know, going to a skills academy, getting kind of certified, taking a exam, but then you get paired with another senior officer to kind of get shown how we do stuff, you know, geography, how to use the radio, how to use the computer, how we process somebody at the jail, you know, the forms, all stuff. And what they're referencing there in the article I saw was just that, wait, he's been a training officer for all these years, but yet, if I remember right, had a bunch of complaints, issues that had come up. And the question is, why would that be your training officer? And I agree with that question. I don't know why that would be your training officer. So we have, of course, it's a lot smaller scale. You know, we only have 17 deputies out on patrol. But like a year like this year, we're hiring 3 or 4. We got retirements, a lot of movement. Our training officers, first of all, naturally move through to different jobs pretty quickly because a detective retiring today, you know, means somebody from a senior person on patrol that's really good becomes a detective. So we don't have anybody that's been a training officer for 18 years, but we monitor those people a lot. And we ask feedback. After you get trained in, we actually interview the new person and say, well, how was that? What was the experience? Because you had maybe 3 deputies that trained you. How did it work? Oh, well, these 2 are really good. This guy, you know, he's a total jerk, or he told me not to follow policy. Well, that would, you know, so we also do some feedback loop to kind of understand what is going on beyond there, because I'm well aware of what can happen. And what that example in Minneapolis is if nobody's minding the store over there, you don't know what you're producing. You know, you're training these new officers and that's who's telling them how business is done, you know. So we have obviously a smaller group, but it is really important to keep an eye on who's training or where they're at. But that's one of the first things to go for us. If somebody were to have some behavioral issues or discipline issues, like we're not going to let you be on special assignments like that because we don't want you to taint the well per se. So it's sad to hear that is what had happened up there.
Thank you, Sheriff. My second question is, I was also very appalled to hear about all the complaints that citizens had reported against Chauvin previously. I know you talked about, you know, if there are red flags that you guys catch internally, but I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit more about with folks in enforcement, you know, are they able to just bounce around like freely with having complaints against them? Me as a citizen, am I able to look up a specific law enforcement officer to see if there have been previous complaints against them, especially if I feel like something went wrong with an interaction? Yeah, if you could speak to that.
So Minnesota has pretty complex data practices laws as well. A whole nother thing that when we speak of reform, there's beyond just this piece of it, but there's a lot of complications. But under that law, the way it's written, I'm going to try to keep it really simple, but when the complaint, if it's sustained, it becomes then public, but while the investigation's going on, it becomes, try to keep it real simple, but there is a lot that we can't disclose through employment law, through the data privacy piece of it. So we can't tell people a lot of stuff. But when a complaint comes in and, we have to report yearly to the post board what kind of citizen complaints received. So every year, every chief or sheriff has to submit a form that how many, and then what kind of policies or, whether it's use of force or a policy or, what kind of violations there are. And so we have to also report that in just numbers, not in names, but in numbers. And that's some of the complaints that are being brought up is, well, should the post board have more authority to actually know all that? Because currently complaints are treated internally as that your employee, you need to figure that out, and just the big data gets sent up to the state. So that's one of the reforms that is being asked for is, well, should the post board be more involved in the investigation of those complaints, more of an outside agency? Should they actually do more through the licensure of it? But as of now, they don't have a lot of authority there. If you're convicted of a crime, things like that, then that knocks out your license. But that's some of the reform that's being looked at is how to make that easier. Now, as for Scott County, we do receive very little complaints. Doesn't mean we're doing a great job either. As we know, lack of trust means people don't complain as well. So I acknowledge that. But like I said, we review videos, review reports, try to really know what's going on, and try to ask people for their opinions. But we get very few complaints. When we do, we take them very aggressively, because what we've seen is you can treat it like the example you gave, where somebody's a 20-some-year employee and has all these complaints, all these headaches, or you can deal with that person very aggressively up front. And either they're going to do better and perform better and move on, or they're going to be a problem for you forever. So you can either deal with it, or 15 years later, you're still dealing with, issues that come up. So our kind of route is dealing with it as quickly as possible, or sending somebody on leave while we investigate it, so nothing new happens while you're looking into it. I mean, try to be as aggressive as you can, because we look at, you're putting that investment into that investigations up front versus kind of telling somebody to knock it off, and which used to be a kind of way of doing business years ago, and then hope it doesn't happen again. Well, it's going to happen again. If somebody's got those behaviors and they're reinforced because nothing happens to them, it's going to continue to fester, I think.
That's it. I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Hi, good evening, Sheriff Hennen. Thank you very much for being here. I have a question that I've thought about for a long time over the last several years with respect to policing. And that is the situation of the routine traffic stop when an officer pulls over someone for a rolling stop at a stop sign or an expired tag or a busted taillight or something. So you have the situation where you have a police officer, someone who's armed, standing over someone who's sitting in the driver's seat. And the person sitting there in the driver's seat, of course, is nervous, and police officer can be nervous, especially if it's at night and they can't see inside the vehicle very well, which is understandable on both sides. And so it begs the question, what good is being served to the public when you have the tragic situation of Philando Castile, who was pulled over for, I believe, a busted taillight, and you have Mr. Wright, who was shot yesterday, and he had an expired tag. And it just makes me wonder if the public is really being best served by having armed police officers pulling people over for such, what I feel, are minor offenses like an expired tag or a busted taillight. Things that certainly should be addressed, but is it the best to the public to be served by having someone with a gun addressing these issues? And that maybe, because oftentimes when these situations go wrong, sometimes it's an unarmed person who is shot and killed. And oftentimes in these situations, it seems to be an African-American man. And I'm wondering if maybe a better solution to this policing might be to have perhaps unarmed servants within the police department, say, who have a dashboard camera, but they don't actually pull over the individual. They maybe take a photograph of their license plate, like similar to the concept of a red light camera. They take a photograph of their license plate missing the tag or having an expired tag or the busted taillight or some other minor offense. And then they can take that photograph, send it to the individual, just like you get a red light ticket in the mail, so that there doesn't have to be an interaction between a police officer and someone for a non-violent offense. And it it just seems to me to be so basic. And I'm just wondering why, and not just your department, not our county, but why is it necessary on first principles to have an armed person pulling over someone for an expired tag on their license plate or a busted taillight? Something that, yes, it's not right, but do we really need someone with a gun addressing an individual for such a minor offense? So many of these shootings, like we saw yesterday, could be avoided if we didn't have armed police officers, but maybe an unarmed servant, like I said, in a car monitoring the neighborhood, monitoring the area with a dashboard camera who could take a picture, send it in to the individual, and they address it in court or pay the ticket or whatever. What is your take on that? Having armed officers addressing pulling people over for such minor offenses?
Yeah, it's complicated. I see a couple. I mean, one is you look at the traffic light camera thing. So we tried to implement that and our state law didn't allow it. And then nobody went back to ever try to relook at that, so it just, the way the law is written, a police officer has to observe the traffic violation basically. So that's why the cameras don't work.
Sure.
No reform ever happened to fix that. And it's similar to that thread of there needs to be legislative change to make some of those, I can't enact that because there's not the legislative change to allow me to have a non-licensed peace officer pull somebody over, for instance. Because I think Oakland was it Oakland that was talking about this the last couple of years? They were trying and ran into some of their own state laws, but we really need change at the legislature to realize some of these different ways of looking at business, or look at how we do our business. So that's some of the challenge too. Is my ideas are always going to be within what legislatively I can do, but there definitely is a thread there. The other thread I have is I go, well, I see the traffic stop instance as another example of how the disproportionate lives we live based on color in this community leads to those, so the person getting pulled over with the taillights out or the car has more equipment issues, is that also a symptom of the bigger issues we have in our community too, that is going to also pair those two people on a traffic stop closer together because of that, the community they live in, or the lack of a way to live versus somebody that's not a person of color, and so I also am challenged if I see that too as a symptom of problems in schools and the courts and all those different pieces that are not giving everybody the same footing to be on, so then that also further creates those instances because of, like I said, a simple equipment violation. And so I see that as a symptom of how there's a lot of work to do here. On the traffic stop piece, there is another, these yesterday example. Yeah, okay, we got expired tab. Is that a big deal? No, in the scope of the world and public safety, it's not a big deal. The challenge we'll see is we do, catch crooks every once in a while in our neighborhoods too. So there is this balance of what is the right answer. I don't know, like drinking and driving, like we're out stopping people at 2 a.m. and we're making the street safer if we find a drunk with the taillight out. So it's good, but not everybody stopped is drunk or has a felony warrant or is armed or whatever. So I'm not saying that every stop leads to an arrest or a burglar or anything either, but there is this balance, what is the way to thread that better? And your example of, well, would that resolve the equipment violation of somebody getting notified? The only challenge with that too is we don't give a lot of tickets for the equipment. So then my fear is now the city would be issuing a ticket for a taillight out, and a ticket's always $100, $150. So there's also some issue there of how to do it better. But I do think we need to get better at figuring out what that is, what's the goal of public safety in traffic enforcement and things like that, and what is the role of the officer? Do we want you going out, pull over every car that's taillight out? Well, no. If it's 1 a.m. and the car's weaving as a taillight out, okay, let's look at that. So there is, and I think those equipment violations too probably play into implicit bias and other issues as well of they're going to naturally push you to, I'm going to stop that car, there's a reason to stop it. So I'm feeling good about this stop, so it brings up a lot of conversations that I think we need to figure out in our country, or in our state, but the legislative change is where the work needs to happen, and And we did the big study 2 years ago on the officer encounters, deadly force encounters, and brought forward a lot of ideas that came from that commission to get passed. And some got passed last year, but this year, nothing's happening, right? It's so there's frustration there too of people are at the table coming up with some ideas of how to fix some of these things. And we need to keep pushing our legislature to also push the change and make it happen.
So you're saying the city, the police, the county, sheriffs don't have the power to set policy on who they're going to pull over for traffic violations, who they're not? There has to be a legislative.
Oh, no, we could say, hey, let's be more lenient on taillights. What I meant is we couldn't use a camera to mail a picture. We couldn't enact that because that's not legal in the state, to switch it that far to like find a new technology to accomplish it. That would take legislative change. For us to say, hey, you know what, we should probably be more cognizant of equipment relations. And even when we went to the lights on program, the message was as well, hey, this is a tool that we can help somebody fix their headlight, but also don't like just go pull people over now, because you can give them a fix-it ticket and then you stumble into somebody with a warrant or some other issue that is going to be a worse impact in their life. Like, this is a tool that if you need it, you can also help somebody get their headlight fixed, but don't use it as encouragement to go out and just look for that to hand out this coupon, because you're going to create more, like I said, more possible headaches by engaging that way. But no, the thought process of what is important or not, what are we looking for to stop, to investigate, is definitely on us to be more understanding of.
And finally, then what are you doing to rectify that? Then how are you proactively deciding who to stop and who not to stop, so to avoid some of these altercations?
Yeah, well, we're currently doing we do use of force training every spring, is kind of when we get everybody together and do different blocks. So we've been talking about use of force from the administrative side, not only go do your training, but we've been talking about our thoughts and the new statutes and how to enact. But this incident yesterday is a good reinforcement of how do we bring that up and talk about that. So I think it's a great idea to do more proactively, to talk about and understand what we're doing.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks, Kevin. Just to be cognizant of time, again, I'll thank you at the end. We have like a couple more questions, and then you need to go spend time with your family, and so does everybody else, I'm sure. This is just a comment about the SCSO is union. So if someone is disciplined and disagree, they are able to dispute it through the arbitration process, which rulings on arbitration are public and can be found, and they list a website, and we will supply that when we send out our thank you. So that will be on there too. And then couple last questions. Wondering about advocacy specifically. So this is the first question. Second question is about school resource. So we'll start with advocacy, because we're talking about doing things better. Talking about legislative advocacy, how do you reach people to advocate, and how does the sheriff's department advocate for change? Because I, as a person, can call my legislature, but it looks much different than if the sheriff's department reaches out to a legislative branch to ask for change.
Yeah. So there's two pieces of that. One is the Sheriff's Association is a lobbying type tool. So we have our executive director at the Capitol representing the sheriffs as a whole, trying to speak to some of these bills or finding people to testify when a bill's coming forward. And that's also how we decide how to represent on a committee, like the deadly force encounters. The Sheriff's Association gets, say, 1 or 2 people to represent. So they kind of pick somebody. And then locally as a sheriff, so I have 5, I think it's 7, because of the boundaries overlapping in Scott County. So I think it's 5 reps and 3 senators in our area. I think it's 7 or 8 total that represent there. So I communicate with them. They call me if they have certain questions, and I reach out to them every winter before the session too, just to get that feeler going and say, hey, come chat with me. Let's talk about what's coming this year. And then when I see specific bills, I also reach out to them and try to give my feedback when I can. But like anything, could definitely do more of it. But on specific bills, it's definitely, they do call and ask for advice. Some of them don't. Some of them you don't ever hear from, but some do call and go, what is the thought on this? And they actually want to know my thought more than the Sheriff's Association, because they go, well, that's good and all. Everybody kind of thinks that, but what actually affects, our community. So they do listen when we reach out, or hear me, I guess. I don't know if they always act on it, but we try.
That's all you can do, right? Well,
yeah,
we need to do more. The last question has to do with school resource. Wondering your specific thought on school resource officers. They can be used for outreach, but more often they are used as law enforcement, especially in the school setting. And with the historical trauma, especially kids of color, I'm thinking specifically, and I'm sure this question is more specific to kids of color, it changes the feel of the school for students. Just wondering on your thoughts on school resource officers. And I will just reference that Rich had a friend, Dr. Moss, who did a great presentation about school resource officers, and just speaking to especially kids of color and seeing somebody in uniform, like today is not a good day for that. So what are your thoughts on how do we change that, or if they're worth having?
Since I don't have any schools in the townships, we don't have, school resource officers in our departments. I don't know a ton about, I can't speak accurately of what they experience, like the positives versus the negatives. So, but I do know, like Burnsville Savage School District, I think 3 years ago or 4 years ago, dropped down a bunch of their staffing and replaced them with, I think, deans and things. So I kind of understand the philosophy. I've just never seen it in action either, of what the specific police department sees an advantage, or not. But I know they will tout, of course, that there's community engagement, the kids get to know people. But I also agree that, seeing a uniformed person walking through the hallway doesn't garner that conversation or bigger picture stuff. So I don't have a real strong answer because I don't know enough about, I've never taken any classes even on it or gone to a conference, but I definitely can see the benefits of why some school districts choose not to do it and choose to keep more. And I would equate to some of those problems. Is it a police officer that can solve those problems, or is a dean or a social worker, or a mental health professional in the school more suited than somebody in uniform to actually, the root cause of what you're seeing might be a crime in the school, but what led to that? Well, probably is going to be some other background, in that child's life that needs some help, versus looking at it as a criminal act or not. But
Okay, well, that was a great answer. I just want to again thank you, Sheriff Hennen. Thank you, everybody on my team. I can see all of your lovely faces. We all just are killing it. So thank you so much for that. I look forward to presenting with you again, Sheriff Hennen. So I will touch base with you on what works and when we can do that, because I think this just is a really important conversation. Thank you, everyone who participated, and everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you very much.
thanks a lot, everybody. Appreciate it.